making workshop. Okay, it's one of many workshops that we do as an organization, which is the Chicago MBDA Export Center, which is operated by the Minority Supply Development Council of Chicago. We're a nonprofit organization that actually focuses on minority businesses, helping them to reach scale, helping them to expand, helping them to enter into new markets, helping them to grow their product lines, and helping them to overall make their businesses successful and competitive in the marketplace. So we put together several webinars. We go on trade missions. Our focus right now is Africa. And we've partnered up with different organizations like Mr. Wilmot Allen, which you'll be hearing shortly, with VentureLift. He's one of our strategic partners. He's on the ground in Kenya. He has a wealth of knowledge and information. He's been an executive with USAID. He's been responsible for multi-million-dollar deals. He now has VentureLift, which is a venture capital firm. Also, they also help minority businesses with deal making. They do matchmaking. They have an amazing site in which they can help you find actual vendors to buy your product, as well as finance sourcing. I mean, the list goes on and on. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Wilmot Allen and let him take over.
Thank you, Terry, for that wonderful introduction. I almost started to dance a little bit if you would have kept that going. We are extremely grateful for this opportunity to share with you and with your constituency deal making in Africa. I want to thank you, to say thanks also to the Chicago MBDA, Patricia Haynes as well, for this invitation and opportunity. We are going to go for about 2 hours a day, everyone, and I know that seems like a very long time. We have lots of good content, and we also have the opportunity to make this interactive. And so there are three different segments of this session, and I'll just take you through it right now as I call up the PowerPoint. All right. So I'm going to adjust this to full screen. I see myself. Let me move myself out of the way. Great. Terry, is that coming up? Okay. Can you see that? Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can see it on the screen.
Okay. Great. I'm Wilmot Allen, as Terry has said. I'm based in Nairobi. And today, when we speak about deal making in Africa, we want to understand that Africa is a very, very diverse place, first of all. 54 countries, depending upon the calculation, according to the UN, 55 according to the AU, and full of opportunity, some challenges. For the purpose of our conversation today, we will be focusing on 5 countries: Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. We want to give you a sense in terms of deal making, the context in which deals are made. So for that reason, we want to discuss some of the macroeconomic trends that inform investment and trade. Also, there are now a plethora, and this is just for the US government alone, of policy initiatives that are directed towards strengthening the Africa-US economic relationship. And so we will be touching upon those as well. The next part of this first session will be regional and country profiles. We'll look at some of the investment trends, and then we'll look more closely at Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. This will be the first of 3 sessions. Today is laying the groundwork and the foundation. Tomorrow, we will be presenting some considerations as it relates to trade, and then on Thursday on investment. And let me just give you some more detail about how this is going to work as I try to move. Okay, great. So current and projected economic outlook of the region, factors for trade and investment. I have the good fortune to be joined by some other experts in trade and investment that I'm excited to actually present because I think it's going to enhance and enrich the experience you have. And I think from the perspective of trade, first of all, it's really important to understand how countries are organized and how business gets done. And so that's really the purpose of looking at a lot of the deals, which we'll show you and others will talk through. It gives you a real life example of how deal making actually happens in terms of the partners, the capital that's needed, the challenges, the risk, how they are overcome or sometimes not overcome. And then more importantly, the impact from those transactions that include financial return, but also economic, socioeconomic development impact in terms of improving the lives of the people here on the continent. And so those institutions, and we'll say more about them over the next couple of days. Today, I will be presenting solo, but those institutions include the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Morrison Group, Trademark East Africa, Ashitiva Advocates, a law firm, and then the Uganda Investment Authority. Each session will last 2 hours, as I indicated, and also be recorded. The presentations, I understand, will be made available, I think, after the 3 days, just in case we want to make some tweaks in response to the questions that you have. And I had said here that about 20 minutes, we'll have a period of 20 minutes for questions, for Q&A, but we're going to do it a little bit differently. So after each of these major sessions, 1, 2, and 3 that you see there, we will stop and take a look at the chat and open it up for questions. And hopefully you'll find the information very, very useful. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So, you know, the perspective that I bring to this. I have been in Africa for a little bit over 20 years, off and on. I live now and work in Kenya. I've been here for a little bit over 5 years. Previous to that, I spent most of my life in emerging markets and then focusing on the US. The emerging market work that I've done is focused on Latin America, Asia, as well as Africa. But first things first, let me tell you a little bit about VentureLift. We are an advisory firm, as Terry mentioned. We also have a fintech marketplace platform to connect companies, businesses to trade partners, supply chain, tech transfer, advisory partners, and more. So we're very excited about this. We have a beta site up, which we will launch. And we also will be telling you more about the launch, which will happen next month in early September, that's going to be connected to an event whereby we're partnering with the MBDA Chicago Export Center. So we'll tell you a little bit more about that. It is going to be the Diaspora Investment and Trade Deal event, a seminal event in many ways that we're really, really excited. We have some great partners, a great lineup of speakers, but most of all, it's not a conference, it's not a summit. It's going to be an opportunity and a platform to facilitate trade and investment deals. Just briefly, you can see my bio. I've had experience in private equity at the IFC, in infrastructure and financial institutions. Had the good fortune of being able to work with the CEO, who at that time was Lars Tenel. I came here in 2015 to run the East Africa Trade Investment Transaction team with a firm called Cross Boundary, and also through that relationship led the practice for the firm as director of East Africa. Previous to that, I worked in investment banking. I was a venture capital associate at a MESBIC, an entity that many of you may remember. It's changed. I think they've changed the structure now. They are extinct, but a MESBIC at that time was a venture capital company that primarily invested in women and women-owned businesses. And so that segment I know is a subset of the segment and the constituency of the MBDA, and learned a lot about MBEs through that experience. Worked at the CDFI in Trenton as a finance associate. Some of the projects that I've had the good fortune to work on here have been direct investments through the IFC, so larger transactions, facilitating angel investments, which have been tens of thousands of dollars, and then deals in between. So that has been trade deals in terms of export, import, supporting investment in pharmaceutical facilities, warehousing and logistics, textile and apparel, and tons of agriculture investments. We'll understand why I say tons, because that is a strategic sector on the continent. I also teach a little bit as a trained political economist here on the continent. which has been a great experience to really engage with young people, the next generation of entrepreneurs, business leaders, et cetera, at USIU Africa, and now as a fellow, postdoc fellow at WITS in South Africa. Finally, I wear the hat as an investor. And so that will be predominantly the perspective I bring to this, transaction advisor, entrepreneur even, but also as an investor. RH Managers, RH Fellow is a healthcare private equity fund. So enough about me. Let's get into the presentation. I need to make one adjustment to my screen because I cannot see the left-hand side of this. Okay, so the GDP of East Africa region is growing, and it's led by two countries that are really, I think, important to understand that while these are two of the leading countries, the entire region is one of the most dynamic on the continent. On the continent, it is a population of 1.2 billion. In sub-Saharan Africa, below the Sahara Desert, 800 million. And so we're talking about lots of land, lots of people, lots of consumers. As some of you may know, there are about 54 countries, or 55, depending upon what metric you use. And also, it's the youngest population in the world. The average age, or the median age, I should say, not average, is about somewhere in the early 20s. There is a rising middle class. We'll talk about that later, which a lot of the investors, and we'll see this in some of the data that we'll go through, are really embedding on in terms of driving growth opportunities as consumers. And you can see here that in terms of the information you have, the 304 billion versus the rest, those are other regional trading centers or regions of sub-Saharan Africa: ECOWAS, West Africa, North Africa, SADC, and ECCAS. And as I said before, with the population of about 51 million, you can see that Kenya is a pretty dynamic economy. But what's more, as you look at the 110 million, 109 million from Ethiopia, which is even greater in GDP. Just moving through this, I will not go through everything line by line, but I want you to get sort of the highlights of this. In terms of the top regional export partners, you can see those. A lot of them are in Asia: China, India. China, I think it's well documented, is a tremendous and dynamic trade partner in Africa. Also on the continent now, exporting out back to China and across the world. That's a very important dynamic. Now we see that the U.S. With certain policy initiatives is making, I think, a greater effort to economically engage. You can see the top regional import partners, the industrialization policy focus sectors. We'll talk more about the focus sectors of these regions, and then the FDI volume and the private equity deal volume. We will spend a little bit more time looking at the private equity deal volume. And you might say, you know, I may not be an investor, but I'm here as an entrepreneur, as a business manager, a business executive. But it's important to understand how money is being made on the continent, the sectors it's going into, as an opportunity to come into the continent yourself. And so that's why we will share a lot of information on investment statistics, in addition to trade, just so you'll know who some of the players are, where they're putting the money, some of the data on exits as well. This is a little bit of a different presentation, but I think it's really important to understand that beyond the numbers, there's also the context of institutions, regulation, governance, and that's what we see here. You can look at the Heritage Foundation for a lot of the economic freedom data, whether it's monetary, business, government integrity, trade, et cetera. And you'll be able to get a sense as to the political stability of some of the countries, the ease of doing business, the importance of the rule of law, and how contracts are being honored and enforced. Those are all some of the things that you want to pay attention to as you think about doing business in Africa and deal making. I still see this on the side of my screen, so let me just try to move this down. Give me 1 second. So I can move it. Okay, that is a lot better. Let me just go back to full screen mode. Okay, so while we will present a lot of data, it is also, I think, going to be very important for you to understand how all of these facts and factoids work together in terms of how they shape sectors and influence business. And we want to just briefly point out a few other dynamics, demographic trends, in addition to the macroeconomic trends, and how it's shaping one important sector that's, believe it or not, underinvested in African pharmaceutical market. It's an interesting sector for a lot of reasons. And as you might guess, COVID has put a highlight on the strength of the healthcare system throughout the continent. And one of the dynamics to understand is that in healthcare, it's a huge, huge investment opportunity, which is why I'm aligned with the private equity fund that invests in healthcare. But it's underserved. I've given you the information on the population, and what's important to know here is that most of the pharmaceutical products are imported, and there's a tremendous push for industrialization when it comes to manufacturing in general, but specifically and particularly when it comes to areas like pharmaceutical. We'll talk about textile and apparel later, but that is extremely important to know. And some of the other dynamics is the population boom. There's what's called the demographic dividend in Africa, whereby the young age group compared to Europe and compared to America, Africa is significantly younger. And the reality is that that is going to drive economic growth over the next, hundreds of years. If industrialization is in place, if education, strength, and healthcare, all of these other sectors, infrastructure, and other factors are actually made stronger. But in this slide, we want to just highlight a few things. Population boom, again, understand how all these factors relate to a sector. The statistics are the African population is to double to about 2.3 billion by 2050. And you can see the increase in growth, the growth rate. The implications are this, that, as I said before, the demographic dividend will result in a potential doubling of potential consumers, which is why you hear now words like there's a new scramble for Africa, which is why China, which is why Asia, which is why Europe, which is why America, which is why so many other countries are interested in Africa, not just for geopolitical reasons. It's not a geopolitical nexus where there's a lot of militarization and politics along those lines, but the economic sort of chess game that's happening is very, very real. And those of us who are on the ground, those of us who came here to make sure that their shared prosperity are committed to seeing more citizens of Africa and more African consumers prosper and benefit from the growth of their own economies first. Rapid urbanization and growing middle class, that's driving a lot of investment and trade. Urbanization, more people are coming from the rural areas into cities like where I am, like Nairobi, and there's a growing middle class. I'll give you an example of why that's happening. Nairobi, I think not everyone knows, I didn't know until I came here, is just a wonderful, livable city. I've lived in South Africa. My friends told me my Nigerian friends told me when I first moved to Lagos that if I could make it there, that I can make it anywhere, as Americans say about New York. But the reality is that Africa is a diverse place, but one of the best places, I think, is a city like Nairobi, because so many international companies are here. And you also at the same time have a government focus on developing domestic industry. So it makes for a pretty dynamic environment where the population, the labor pool, is relatively well educated compared to its neighbors, and also wealthier. And so those are some of the things that I think are important to take into consideration. Sorry, let me go back to this. Economic development and improved business. Every country in East Africa understands that it's important to have an economy where ease of doing business is made stronger. One of the countries is, I think, doing one of the best jobs in improving over year is Rwanda. Small country, only 12 million, but really building out a service economy, a technology economy under the leadership of the president and an entrepreneurial class. Terry, can I ask you one thing? I see some things popping up in the chat. If there's something I need to give attention to, please bring it to my attention so that I won't have to toggle between the chat and the presentation. Is that okay, Terry?
That's fine. This is Thomas. I'm gonna be navigating the chat room. So
okay, great.
Yep, not a problem.
Okay. So these next few slides we're going to move to fairly quickly. Again, you will have this presentation an opportunity to go through all of the data, and it's a lot. But the good news is that I haven't taken anything that I've created myself. It's in the public domain, and we'll share with you some leading resources to get some of the data, the numbers, the market trends, business trends, the macroeconomic trends as we are going through now. You can see one of the leading ones, in my view, is the African Development Bank. The current account deficits, the trade balances are really important to understand. And as we continue, we're obviously going to talk about the big elephant in the room, which is the impact of the pandemic. And Africa may not be in the news. I watch CNN a lot, and it's dominated by what's happening in America. And I know that, it's a serious issue. I'm glad that my parents are well there. But we're in a part of the world where news coverage is not as vast, but there are challenges here as well, in the sense that the economy has been hit like every other place. Many of the jobs will not come back, and it's impacted not only the current account balance, but you can see also in the following slides that because of the impact on supply chains, on consumer demand now, and salaries and disposable income that people have, there's like everywhere else, there's been a domino effect. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. A reality that has to be taken into consideration, particularly if you're looking at borrowing from banks and even doing large infrastructure projects, is the amount of sovereign debt. Sovereign meaning the government debt. You can see that here. That's something very important to take care of, to take into consideration. And I'll give you a good example from my experience. So I have been involved, was brought into a project that is a port project, $1 billion port project. Investors from the world have presented the capital to invest, to develop this port. And one of the problems is that it has to be guaranteed, a sovereign guarantee in this case, because of the large transaction that it is. And that kind of stalled the transaction from going forward because of the debt burden of the country. And so, this is $1 billion transaction, so it's different scale than maybe some of the smaller transactions. Everything's smaller compared to that, whether it's a large corporate or angel investment or a trade deal between SMEs or MSMEs. But it's something to keep in mind that there's a trickle-down effect from that in terms of the solvency of companies here and the lack of guarantees that most governments can provide to certain businesses. But the good news, we'll talk about this on day 2 and 3, that there are other institutions now that have loan guarantee facilities, both in the US and on the continent, Exim Bank, Afro-Exim Bank, et cetera. And we will get into those, but it's very important to understand the debt burden that's happening throughout the continent. The good news is that I think also more institutions are sensitive to that and paying attention to the fact that we have to now, as a global community, look at this, not just in Africa, but across the globe, to say, how, the risk that countries and regions, in this case, a continent, will face if this isn't addressed. To kind of think about debt relief from the IMF, to think about offering an alternative to many countries, sovereign countries that come in and it's all in the news and lend a lot, oftentimes at really disadvantageous rates. There are institutions now like the U.S. Development Finance Corporation that are offering equity as a way to kind of mitigate some of that risk from high debt in financing infrastructure projects, healthcare projects, and others, and we'll get into that. Let's talk about COVID a little bit. COVID and natural disasters have had a big hit on the East African industries and the economy. There's a projection that the economy will shrink by about 2% in 2020. 30 to 40 million Africans may be pushed into extreme poverty because of that. The impact of natural disasters is yet to be quantified. Locusts have been a big problem now here in East Africa, Ethiopia, and Kenya. In Kenya, it's starting to be under control now. Going forward, I don't think it's going to be projected to impact the economy as negatively, but nevertheless, something to pay attention to. This is an illustration before COVID-19, during baseline and worst case scenario, a regional comparison. And you'll see from this that on the right-hand side, East Africa is first, that the projections are that East Africa will be, relatively speaking, in better shape than most other regions in Africa. While these recovery efforts are underway, there is a continually close examination of what the impact of this loss in GDP, loss in economic growth, jobs, productivity, et cetera, will mean. This is a good chart to understand in terms of pre and post-COVID, the impact on GDP growth. And it's pretty self-evident that it is significant, and that that is another reason why even during this time of recovery, pathways to engaging in trade and investment still have to go on as they do in most countries. I will say this: we have been, VentureLift and our partners, BNC, East Africa Chamber of Commerce, the Chicago MBDA Export Center, Exim Bank, and others have had a series of webinars on diaspora engagement with the continent in one-way and two-way trade and investment to support recovery efforts in both the U.S. and Africa. And I'm going to give another plug for this event that's coming up on September 21st. That is also a primary focus of that event. So it's something that you don't want to miss, September 21st through 25th, the Diaspora Investment and Trade Deal event. Let's keep it moving. Inflation by countries, as you might expect, is going up. Prices are going up because businesses are suffering. You have a lot of stock that hasn't moved. You have a lot of stock that hasn't shipped because of the stress on supply chains, logistics, et cetera. I'm going to pause here. This is actually, I should have paused before, so I went a little bit longer than expected, I think, on the first two parts without opening up for questions. So let me pause there and ask Thomas if he can help with curating questions, please.
Yes. It's nothing right now, so we'll wait a minute and see if anybody has any questions.
Okay.
Yeah, and if we did mention before, you guys are more than welcome to put your questions right into the chat, and then we'll actually read those questions off to Wilmot, and then he'll be happy to answer them.
All right, so we're moving into the area and discussion of policy initiatives that are aimed to help you do trade and investment deal making on the continent. We will focus on the initiatives put forth by the U.S. primarily. Some of them are international, but it won't be like any of the European policies, trade agreements, or the ones from Asia. And that's primarily just because we're speaking to and addressing an American audience primarily, but we do welcome our African friends as well who are joining us. Agenda 2063. If I could see you, I would ask this question: how many of you, by show of hands, have ever heard of this? Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Interesting. And it's something that the Africa Union, which is headquartered in Ethiopia, has put forth. It's a strategic framework for pursuing and realizing sustainable development. And it has sort of a Pan-African ethos to it, as many of the policies of the African Union by definition do. It's very, very important because I think this is an excellent example of this push now for greater economic reliance that I think it would behoove us as a global community to support that's going on in Africa now, and to help the business community in partnership with governments, the nonprofit sector, in making more of this a reality. I just want to go through these just very, very briefly.
I'm sorry, Dr. Allen, we do
Sure.
have a question here as it relates to COVID. So with COVID and travel restrictions in most countries, what ways can we navigate this to begin the process of establishing relationships?
Sorry, what way can we begin to establish relationships? Yes,
the process of establishing relationships.
Right, as everyone knows, most things are happening digitally. The skies here are beginning to open, there are flights going in and out. But if you're like me, maybe you're a little skittish about flying right now, and there's a very good reason to be so. So I think I would answer that by saying, join the digital revolution in terms of getting information through the great resources that the Chicago MBDA Export Center offers, regular webinars, ways to engage online. VentureLift is doing the same. There's tons of reading material. There are, tutorials on YouTube. But I think over and beyond that, it's through that, I should say, through all those means, making connections with people. Most of us are working at home or working on different schedules or spending more time not in the office in any event. And so, that's a great opportunity to try to connect online. And these types of opportunities, I would say, would be one, to be able to, first of all, self-educate yourself. And then our company, and there are others like us, not quite doing the same thing, but our company specializes in making economic connections. So we're happy to talk to you more about your specific need. So Thomas, if you also can just put, I'm not sure if you have it, maybe I can write it in, just my contact information. It's on the last slide. But do you have my email address? I'm happy to talk about that more, but I think it's doing just what I said, trying to make virtual connections, educate yourself. And then I think also taking time to, if you are looking to do business in Africa, I always say this particularly to so many of my friends and fellow Black Americans who are eager to get back to Africa. Year of return, it's all great. I celebrated, I was in Accra in December. Get to know African Americans, get to know American Africans in the US. That's the best way to understand how to do trade in Africa. There are some great institutions right there in Chicago. I think I haven't had much interaction. It's the Africa Global Chamber of Commerce, whom I expect to speak with soon. East Africa Chamber of Commerce in Texas, and the Africa Center. So there are lots of other diaspora networks in America. I would make it my business to get to know people who are from Africa, who originally second, third generation, who can tell you firsthand what it's like to do business, not only do business, but live in Africa. So last thing I'll say this, over and beyond business, understand the culture, use this time to read, even if it's a fictional novel on some aspect of life. It'll give you a sense as to how people on this side of the world see the world. And then when possible, I also would look at some of the nonfiction writings. A great volume is written like these reports, biographies of how people have made it in Africa. So these are some of the tools I would avail myself of now. Is there another question, Thomas?
No,
I'm
that's
sorry.
it. There is no other question. I did put your email up though. Your
Okay,
email.
great.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I want to just read these because so often people think, and when they hear Africa, first of all, it's all the same, and that it's very, very chaotic, and that's not true. I mean, you know, the first book that I read on Africa, and the way I came here actually was, I say this, it really was Africa coming to me. I grew up in the Midwest in Cincinnati, Ohio, and my parents entertained Africans from a lot of times from Southern Africa. Students at the University of Cincinnati would stay with us, and that's how I got to know Africa through people. But one of my sisters gave me a book called Democracy in Botswana. Democracy in Botswana. And I tell you, it changed my view. I was used to, like many of you maybe who are not from the continent or never been there, National Geographic, you know, Animal Kingdom. That's all there was. That's all there is. Of course, you know, with the world getting closer and borders shrinking and technology expanding, media expanding, you know, most people hopefully don't still view Africa that way. But I never have really had that impression from a younger age. From my teens, I didn't, but before maybe. And that has been the biggest blessing for me, to read about a stable democracy that hadn't gone through civil war, that had a traditional system called the Kagatla system of deliberative rule that is still present in their government today, in terms of the vestiges of the culture are still present in the government, in the way the country's governed today. And I raise that just because I think it's important as you do business to be open-minded, to understand that the conception that you may have may not be the reality. Or if it is, it may not be all of the reality. So let me just read these 7 aspirations, just to affirm that the Agenda 2063 is moving forward with positive goal setting, goals for a prosperous Africa, an integrated continent, politically united and based on ideas of Pan-Africanism, an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. A peaceful and secure Africa, an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, shared values and ethics, an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women, youth, and caring for children. Africa is a strong, united, and influential global player and partner. Those are great aspirations. Those are great declarations. And so that is what the AU has set out, which is being adopted. When I say adopted, meaning these are the aspirational goals that a lot of alignment is coming around in terms of government policy. Not necessarily in that language, but towards that end. Economic priorities, incomes, jobs, and decent work, health and nutrition, education and science, technology, innovation, economic diversification and resilience, climate resilience and natural disaster preparedness. I can tell you firsthand about the truth of that. One of the great assignments I've had recently over the last 9 months was to work with the Africa Union, this still on this topic, but also bringing back in COVID response. The Africa Union Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Ethiopia. And I can tell you, it was exciting to know that that institution is mobilized around Africa being more self-sufficient for strengthening its own healthcare systems and responding to healthcare emergencies like the one we're experiencing now, and taking action to do it through institution building. So the days of being an object versus an agent, totally relying upon aid and having others drive your growth, those days are over throughout the continent. There's still vestiges, but in terms of the aim, in terms of where people are mobilizing resources and how they're mobilizing resources, that's the direction that the continent is moving in. So the Africa Union CDC is now moving forward with raising $1 billion over 10 years, 450 million, I think, immediately for COVID response, COVID relief and response. And it's a great plan. There's a new foundation. This is the work that I was assigned to develop the strategy for it. The Africa Public Health Foundation. That's a great example of the Africa we want being implemented. Let's go on. Improving African capital markets. Some of you may be in the capital markets sector in America, and I want you to know, yes, it is true that capital markets are underdeveloped relatively, especially compared to those in the West, but they are improving, they're strengthening. And South Africa has the largest one, then Lagos. Even the East African security exchanges are now improving. Still the case that there isn't a lot of volume, there isn't a lot of activity. There are few companies that dominate most of the trading on the market, but yet more are listing, and so that's a good thing. And there are other ways to actually engage the capital markets with new products that are being developed, new ways to kind of think about addressing public problems through social bonds, through infrastructure bonds. And one of the countries that's leading that is where I'm sitting right now, the country of Kenya. Infrastructural connectivity. I'm also sitting in a place that is one of the technology leaders in terms of innovation and technology and infrastructure. You may have heard of companies like M-Pesa for financial infrastructure, mobile money. Africa's Talking, APIs to help internet connections, to help the internet work, etc. Modern agriculture and an ocean economy. Thomas, I'm going to check in with you again. I just saw a little notice. Is there a question?
No, they just asked if I could put the name of the book on the in the chat. So it's Democracy in Botswana.
Yes, by John Holm. I think the author I may have forgotten. Holm, I believe is in it. But that is an older book. If they want to reference, please have them reach out to me. I can give you more recent titles. They give you, a greater historical and a greater sort of diversification on state building, nation building here in Africa as it relates to political economy as well.
Okay. And I did put your email, Wilmot at blafrica.com in the chat room so that they have that as well.
Okay, great. Okay. So the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, Treaty Area and Agreement, AFTA aims to increase productivity, support integration into the global economy, and reduce poverty. So I want to spend a little time on this because this is a game changer. I'm going to go through this relatively carefully just so you understand. And maybe it'd be good also just to know, I wish we could have done some polling during registration and know the types of businesses that are represented, because this agreement, this initiative changes Africa, aims to, and I think it will work to achieve greater global integration for the African continent and the global continent with Africa in a way that I think will build greater economic self-reliance here. Brokered by the AU in 2018, operationalized, but yet to fully be implemented due to COVID-19. So what's at stake here? Why is this so important? If you've read much on Africa, this will invariably continue to come up. And here's why. It will create the largest free trade area by the number of participating countries, 55, 54, 50, or 55, however you count, with a GDP of 3.4 billion among a population of 1.3 billion. And what's happening is it's gonna result in the removal of tariffs, which are duties, on 90% of the goods. And that has been, I think, one of the big blessings or detriments, I should say, to kind of facilitating interregional and cross-border trade or international trade has been duties and tariffs. We have a presenter that will be on tomorrow from the Morrison Group, Kevin Morrison, will talk about his firsthand experience and how he's navigating that in the work that he's doing in trading commodities, textiles, fashion, health and beauty products as well. What are the objectives? It's to create a single liberalized, meaning opening up the economy, market that deepens integration of the continent, lowers tariffs, and reforms trade facilitation. And you can see, I'll stop there for a second. You can see on the right a view of the continent that indicates, what the status of it. This is a little bit dated, so I know the country. If you're asking, what is that country that hasn't signed? Who are they? It's Eritrea, and at that time of this, it had not signed. I need to check if that's changed, but you can see the support of this free trade area agreement. It's going to not only result in moving a product, but money and people. Right now, sometimes it's, depending upon where you are on the continent and the country you're trying to move into, it's very difficult to get work permits and visas in a different country. Now, some countries have done that very, very well. If you've ever been to South Africa and worked there, you'll realize, wow, there are a lot of Zimbabweans in South Africa. If you go to Tanzania, someone will say, wow, there are a lot of Kenyans. And so it does happen. But in order for, I think, for Africa to reach its potential, of course, this has to be improved upon. And one of the things that will come out of that will be, I believe, capacity building, technology transfer. I think that it will make it more attractive for investment, because as the management capacity is strengthened, investors are more confident that their money will return to them faster and at a greater level as well. And I can tell you how important that is in terms of movement of capital people, because there is a diversification of labor pool talent, skill talent across even the East Africa region. If you think about it, what is happening in a country like Ethiopia, a population of 110, they are now opening up their economy, working to improve labor productivity, educating their population, because of the great opportunity they have to be a leading economy, not only just in East Africa, but throughout the continent. And capital now follows people in terms of, you invest in companies that are well run, that are well managed and well governed. And that has been, I think, one of the biggest concerns of investors in Africa. I can tell you from firsthand experience, particularly in the startup community, there is an issue in Kenya. It's very, very stark. The issue is, in technology companies here in Kenya, in startups, most of the funding is coming from outside the continent in terms of international investors investing in companies that are run by expats. And it just so happens now, I just read, my partner sent me a note yesterday, a couple days ago, that Kenya is now instituting a provision whereby in order to get a business license, you have to concede 30% ownership locally. And at VentureLift Africa, we have been advocating for this for a long time. And I'll tell you why. Not only is it in order to forestall a neo-colonialism, but it's now going to challenge, I think, more of us as expats to get deeper into the economy and get to know people, not just fly out and kind of create the kind of be encamped in your own enclave and only interact when you work or on leisure, and for leisure activities. Is really going to force, I think, more reckoning as to why people are coming to the continent, in terms of, is it to make money, or are you really interested in uplifting and working with Kenyans as equal partners? And so I think it's an excellent push. We'll see how well it's implemented. I'm hoping that as historical diaspora, there may be some provision for us to kind of move with that. But I can tell you, it's always been the objective of VentureLift Africa to do that. And it's really, really important, because of the fact that it will lead to stronger skills being developed, particularly among the younger entrepreneurs who have not, like myself, been able to after college, work in an internship program for 2 or 3 years on Wall Street or a consulting firm where you get excellent professional socialization, top-notch skills, but even more important, relationships. And so that's why that's so important. And that's why I think this whole movement, easing of the movement of people and capital, especially people, is going to be beneficial to most of the countries, particularly in East Africa, but even for the rest of the continent. I would think, my thinking about that is that we'll see some efforts towards national planning. What do I mean by that? In terms of some countries no longer have priority investments in some of their strategic sectors where they have a competitive advantage. What's an example of that? Well, we have a lot of arable land. Maybe we should be, and we have a lot of arable land on the coast that is uninhabited, unengaged. So that is, an excellent opportunity for greater investment. Or it could be a situation where once we had a thriving textile and apparel sector, we have now seen local or domestic textile and apparel sector. Textile meaning you take the raw material, you make cloth. The cloth, apparel means you make clothes. So going from the field to the store, integration of the entire value chain is the potential of Africa. And we'll look at this a little bit later in some of the work that I've done. And what the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement could do is could put more pressure and a greater sort of incentive for more national economies to invest in strategic sectors like that. What's at stake? Well, we can see what's happening in the sense that there's some nations that are coming in and building these facilities and exporting out. We can see what's happening with secondhand clothing, and many believe, and I think there's a valid argument for this, crowding out development of that sector. It's $1 billion industry. It's very, very political. I'm not going to get into that now, but there is an opportunity now for national governments to say, hey, look, we want to mobilize resources for the reinstatement and support of these strategic sectors that are now underdeveloped, underinvested in. And we'll hear from an institution tomorrow like Trademark East Africa, how the logistics and trade clusters play a role in that. Let's keep moving. Moving towards establishing a future continental custom union, achieving sustainable and inclusive social economic development, gender equality, structural transformation, enhance competitiveness of member states within Africa and on the global market. I want to touch on gender equality. As anyone knows who I think is intellectually honest and experienced in business in the US and even here in Africa, some of the best entrepreneurs are women. And if Africa is going to move forward on its best foot, the best pathway, empowerment of women, gender inclusion is absolutely essential. And so what we see now is the movement, the impact investment groups, family offices, even indigenous support for greater empowerment of women. Some of it is cultural, but there's a demonstration effect now that women entrepreneurs, I sit on the board of a great company. I always like to give a plug for them because I really believe it's a great company in Kenya called Melvin Marsh International. Melvin's Tea, woman-owned and led firm, family-owned firm, and very well-respected leader. Has been the head of the chairperson of Kenya Association of Manufacturers, international seats, and it's a no-brainer to lower the barriers to greater gender equality and inclusion. Finally, encourage industrial development through diversification, regional value change, development, and food security. You would be surprised this as you come, and we'll see this over the next couple of days as we talk about the agricultural sector. It is, I think, alarming that given Africa has so much arable land, so much land mass, that food security is an issue here. And that is why countries like Kenya and others throughout the continent most understand that agriculture is a basic fundamental, strategic, core sector to the growth of the countries, even more than natural resource endowment, right? Because there's so much land, and there's most of the population still lives in the rural setting and not urban. And so food security investing in value-added processing, the challenge is not only growing it, but allowing the raw materials to be processed here and building industry and business around that so that that can happen, as opposed to what happens oftentimes in places like West Africa. Raw cocoa goes out. I think more of it's being processed, some of it is now being processed on the continent, but going out and coming back in a product like candy bars and other things at a markup, at a price that if you follow the money, definitely there's some inequity there. And so I think that there is a huge opportunity to bring greater economic development, growth, and justice to a situation as we invest in value-added processing and address food insecurity. Diversification. One of the good things about the region that we're focusing on today, which I want to emphasize, is that the economies are typically more diversified economically in terms of the sectors that the economies are dependent on than other sectors. What do I mean by that? Well, again, if I were in front of you, I would ask this question by show of hands. What do most people think of in terms of sector when they think of Africa? I believe many, a fair number, would say mining. Some would say oil. Some would say agriculture. And those are all true. But believe it or not, in relationship to to West Africa and Southern Africa, East Africa is less advanced in its mining and oil and gas. It's taking off now in Kenya and other places, but it's not Nigeria, which has stood up on oil, right? And that has both advantages and risk, as we've seen the Naira, the volatility in the Naira based upon that reality over the last couple of decades. Or South Africa, or the country that I alluded to before, Botswana. One of the reasons why Botswana, which has a relatively small population, is so affluent in terms of middle income status, is because of diamonds, 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 diamonds. In East Africa, you don't hear, that's not the same song that's being sung. It's how can we advance tech, agriculture, financial services. So these countries are not as dependent upon and impacted by the volatility of commodity prices as are regions like West Africa and Southern Africa. But at the same time, if those economies, if the market for those goods is strong, you have a great opportunity in Angola economically. You have a great opportunity economically in Ghana, Nigeria, which has propelled the wealth of those countries. East Africa, more diversified. I think that mitigates some business risk, market risk, and even political risk as well. It's a whole different conversation about some ideas about Dutch disease, which are political science and political economy ideas, but have been a reality in the economic history and the political history of the continent. Let's keep going. Eac Industrialization Policy targets stronger integration into the global economy, opening new opportunities for growth and expansion, manufacturing, and helping small and medium-sized enterprises. Great. The vision, globally competitive, environmentally friendly industrial sector in East Africa. Some of the targets: diversifying the manufacturing base, raising local value-added content, resource-based export, strengthening the region's industrial frameworks, R&D, technology, expanding trade, transforming micro and small, medium-sized enterprises into viable, sustainable business entities capable of contributing to at least 50% of manufacturing GDP. So each of these slides, I'm gonna read through them pretty quickly or relatively fast, but try to highlight one nugget that's really important. It's this last one: transforming MSMEs. It's really important to know that there is, on the continent of Africa, that's everywhere throughout East Africa, what's called a formal economy and an informal economy. The formal economy is what is on the tax books, right, on the register. That happens through larger companies that are more formally structured. The informal economy, smaller, more like a side hustle business that most of the population is involved in Africa, the informal economy. So what's an example of that? So if you've ever come here and you have been in a car driving from the airport, stuck in traffic, and someone's knocked on your window with bananas, nuts, a t-shirt, a tie, a towel, that's the informal economy. That's the informal economy. And even smaller than MSMEs, actually. And so those businesses make up a big part of the economic activity on the continent. So the goal here is to now take those businesses and that entrepreneurial zeal and talent and be able to grow it into a larger enterprise. And that takes a lot of effort and I think a structured and formal pathway to actually achieve that. And we're seeing more of that happen now through the power of technology. There are ways now, there are efforts being made for aggregating onto a platform, e-commerce platform, different sites for artisans to sell what they have. And that's been the eBay effect, right? And the Amazon effect, Jumia effect now, but this is more targeted on products and services from the informal economy. So we're a little bit over an hour, and I'm going to see how much I have left. I want to make sure I don't leave out something. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, great. So AGOA is a very important act. Prosper Africa is a relatively new mechanism now to strengthen U.S.-Africa engagement. These are two that definitely, if you're engaged in trade, particularly in some of these areas that I mentioned, food, textile and apparel, really, oil, precious metals, probably have driven, I would say, AGOA in terms of the economic activity between the U.S. and Africa. So it was renewed through 2025, and the goals are to enhance market access to U.S. for qualifying sub-Saharan African countries. Qualification for AGOA preference is based on some conditions. Oftentimes, they're opaque to some people, and it's good to get a third-party advisor involved in helping you navigate that. And it builds on existing U.S. trade programs. Again, the whole customs regime is a very difficult one, sometimes a big bottleneck to getting deals done. This tries to address that. So far, what we've seen is two-way trade increased to about 39 billion as of 2017. It's larger than that. Now, some of the top exports, U.S. good exports, machinery, vehicles, aircraft, export countries, South Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana. Imports, oil. It should be no surprise. This is going from Africa to the U.S. Precious metals, cocoa, those things I mentioned before. The top supplying countries, South Africa, Nigeria, Angola. Guess what? They're all commodity-based economies. And from Kenya, we have a couple of examples. Nuts, the apparel, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda to some extent, definitely Ethiopia, Kenya and Ethiopia being the hubs for textile and apparel. Kenya has exported over 55 billion worth of garments duty-free. So there is a lot to be said for AGOA. Some people think it hasn't been, some observers think that it hasn't fulfilled its potential. And I think there are lots of reasons for that, right? I think part of it is infrastructure challenges. Again, we'll hear more about that. There are some exciting plans for East Africa in the works. Some of it has been some of the aspects of being able to have the right structures in place, the right businesses in place with the right management to take advantage of some of those opportunities. There's the whole framework that oftentimes is complicated. There are regulatory standards in the US that are higher for some countries to meet. In fact, you will see this when we talk about textile and apparel in just a little bit, that is for sure the case when it comes to why China, which has a huge presence in the textile and apparel industry, doesn't look to export to the US at all. It doesn't export, you know, a lot of apparel to the US from Africa. It does from other parts, from Asia, but from Africa. And for two reasons. One, from here, you know, it's meeting those standards, but also you have a huge market. You have a huge continental market that you can serve through textile and apparel, and that's exactly the strategy that predominantly is being pursued by China here. Thomas, can I stop for questions before we move on to Prosper Africa?
Yes. Please feel free to ask any questions. Right now, we don't have any. So.
Great. So I do want to let me pose a question because we're at a point where I think we have about 40 minutes left. Then we were going to open up for a formal question in period time. I would like to ask if some of the listeners who are with us could indicate what sector they are interested in. Some of the comments I'm going to make going forward, I want to try to tie to their sector for the remaining part of the session. So can we take a few minutes, if you would be so kind, just to share in the chat the sector. We do want to make this interactive and want to get, hold on.
Passenger ground transportation.
I'm sorry?
The first was passenger ground transportation, medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, health and skincare.
Great, I see it now. Information technology.
Yeah.
Great, okay. And can you also ask them which countries, if they've targeted a country, which countries they might be interested in? Okay, now the next question is countries. If people could identify in East Africa, which Kenya and Ethiopia, thank you, Bennett, wholesale distributors, others?
Tanzania.
West Africa, so Jasmine, please come back September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. We'll be speaking, well, come back tomorrow and Thursday as well, but we'll be focusing on West Africa in early September. Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, thank you, Victor. Got it, I see FinTech for trade and industry from Michael Harper. Great, okay, so that gives me some sense. So let's talk about Prosper Africa. There is a Prosper Africa toolkit, which I can make sure in the tomorrow session that we can send out. In fact, Thomas, if I forget, please remind me. I can make available the handouts to the report on textile and apparel sector, which I'm going to get to, and then some of these big references to policy. Some of them have, you know, a document on the different advantages and a toolkit, if you will. So Prosper Africa is one of those. In fact, it's widely accessible online. Okay, so let's keep moving. Prosper Africa. Let me enlarge my screen again. Okay, so you can tell by all of the agency collaboration on the right that it's a big, big deal, right? Maybe I can enlarge this, but XM, USAID, OPIC, which is now the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, Millennium Challenge Corporation, SBA, our good friends at U.S. Africa Development Foundation, and more. And the reason that is the case is that it is yet another indication of increasingly how important Africa is to the US for economic reasons, even for geopolitical reasons and political reasons. As we see now that so many other countries are here and getting a foothold on the continent. And let's look at some of the goals to modernize US capabilities and efforts. There's a need for coordination. There's a need for establishing greater efficiency in how these agencies work together. And then the bottom line is facilitating deals. Expanding US companies' access to information and provide financing support. And I think continuing to help Africa improve in terms of business climate, financial sector, reducing barriers to private sector and trade. We talked about that. Supporting development and deepening financial sectors in Africa, advocating for sustainable economic development policies, supporting private sector-led growth. There are a number of initiatives. There's one here in East Africa now that is open for bid. There's another one that's coming through Prosper Africa. I'll talk about the East Africa Trade and Investment Hub, I think next actually. And there's now in the works what essentially will be a continental trade and investment hub for it that will include even North Africa that's coming as well. But there is, Google please at your leisure, Prosper Africa Toolkit. I think I have a copy on my desk. It is this. Prosper Africa Toolkit's black and white, so you may not be able to see it clearly. U.S. Government Trade and Investment Services. And it is a really, really, I think, helpful overview of a lot of the policies and tools that the U.S. is backing with money and with relationships on the ground to strengthen Africa, strengthen U.S.-Africa relationships. And I'll say this is more than ever, I think, a time, again, to educate yourselves while we are mostly not back in the office, spending more time out of the office, perhaps more time online, et cetera, because this is, I think, historically, particularly with the constituency, the minority constituency, people of color, the MBDA serves, I think that has been a huge disadvantage, if you will, that miseducation or lack of education about opportunities to do business with Africa. Obviously, that's why we're doing this. It's a great idea, but continue to explore these opportunities. Things are happening fast. There are sites like grants.
Dr. Allen, I'm sorry. I'm getting feedback. It says that they're seeing your view of the presentation as opposed to the full presentation. Is there?
They're seeing my view of it. I'm not sure what you mean.
It's not the full screen.
Okay, on my side it is. Let me just see.
There's a lot of black around, like it says no notes at the bottom. It says, okay, that's much
okay, wait a minute. Hold on, let me just.
Yeah, this takes up the whole screen now.
Okay, is it still there or is it not the whole screen?
It's the whole screen now. It's fine.
Okay, great. Okay. So yeah, so this is the time to take advantage of these initiatives. And again, as I said, underserved communities in the U.S. typically have not been at the table. And I think that there's an opening because of all of the reckoning that's going on in America right now to increase diversity, to increase, going from a small, predictable set of partners with the U.S. government, USAID in particular, to expanding that. And this is the opportunity because there's government, I think regardless of what happens going forward and the elections, that will still be the case to a greater or lesser extent, U.S. commitment to Africa. And so what you'll find in this document, you understand the business environment that the U.S. is trying to create with Africa partners. And a lot of it is going to have to do not just with helping Africa, but helping the U.S. institutional infrastructure get better at operating more efficiently, in some cases with greater transparency, in some cases even with greater fairness when it comes to procurement. Deal identification, there's a lot of effort being deal evaluation. So Please avail yourself of this resource. It's the Prosper Africa Toolkit, deal structuring as well. You'll see on day 3, we'll talk more about that. There are agencies that can help you with that, implementation, et cetera, et cetera. And then the good thing about it is this, in this toolkit, at the very end, it has reference web links, which you can also avail yourself of. All right, so let's keep moving. Let's go to East Africa Trade and Investment Hub, an enterprise that ended, sorry. Okay, note to self, turn off the phone. East Africa Trade and Investment Hub is an entity that you may recall that I said I was very familiar with. I came here in 2015 and was privileged enough to be able to be tasked with running the transaction team for a firm called Cross Boundary, which had a subcontract agreement with DAI. So DAI had won the contract from USAID, and this is a really, really important initiative, so much so in this presentation, we have a couple case studies from it. But let's go through it quickly. It ran from 2014 to 2019 as a flagship program of the Trade Africa Initiative, the Presidential Trade Africa Initiative, based in Nairobi. They help the private sector engage with government resources to find solutions to trade and investment, or as we say, unlock capital. And that's exactly what happened. In my 2 years for the Trade Hub, we were mandated with doing $25 million a year, which in a 12-month period, as many know, deals can go sideways for a lot of different reasons. We were fortunate enough to have good success in doing over 2 years for the Trade Hub, met those marks, but exceeded it by another 50 million. So that in my time there, in 2 years, it was about over 120 million, both Trade Hub work that we did for the Trade Hub and work we did for other partners. And so really, really pleased with that result. I think it is a model that worked well in many ways, but there were some challenges as well, and I'll talk about those in just a little bit. Supported 249 million in exports through AGOA, created 38,000 new jobs, provided export assistance to 1,200 firms. There you go, there you go, there you go. Great. We're going to look at one case study from that in just a minute. It's going to be a project. Let me see if it's coming up here. Yeah, it's going to be a project that actually in the next section. So let's continue. One of the things I think those of us who were connected to Trade Up would say did a lot of great work in facilitating, but we have to kind of help more local companies and help more local investors get involved in investing in their own economy. And that's one of the reasons why I think what we're doing at VentureLift, which is why I founded it, is able to do. But our focus, or I think the new dimension to this whole equation that we focus on is diaspora engagement. I think the East Africa Trade Investment Hub did extremely well. I think he probably performed a little bit better than the Southern Africa Trade Investment Hub. West Africa Trade Hub is up. We'll talk about that later. But now there's a continental effort. So if people think that the U.S. government is not involved in Africa, not doing good things, look again. USAID is a force, doing a lot of good work. No institution is perfect, obviously, but doing a lot of good work. Power Africa, U.S. Kenya Prosper Counties is another initiative. And we need to, as I assume most of the parties on the phone are Americans, understand that, you know, we have something special going on in America in terms of the rule of law, rights, economic freedom, and we understand economic autonomy. That is a really, really important goal of USAID, and I think that we all can play a part of that. We think that the diaspora can certainly play a part of that, play a big part of that as well. People I know that are hardworking, and you know, looking to get even more done. U.S. Kenya Prosper Counties. We'll hear more from the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce shortly, in about 24 hours, and that will focus on how do you engage counties and why is that important. Obviously, U.S. Kenya Prosper Counties is trying to address that, and it's doing it in various ways. I haven't worked in this program, but I've heard about it. Power Africa I know pretty well, which has been around for a while. In fact, you should know that there is, I think, sort of a sister an ally to the MBDA called the National Association of Security Professionals, had an agreement, and now has a working relationship with USA through an enterprise called MEDA to facilitate greater investment in infrastructure and other sectors. Power Africa has been a partner on that, and it's addressing a huge need on the continent, which is enabling the electricity access by adding 60 million new connections, 30,000 megawatts of new and cleaner power, et cetera, has had some good results, and we know it's still a need here on the continent. I want to move to this next one. Give me 1 second. Great. I want to maybe skip down. I think we'll have enough time. I'll cover this slide and then go to my research. But I wanted to just give you an introduction to one of these deals. Let me just talk about an East Africa Trade and Investment Hub deal now, because I think we will have time. I'm going to skip ahead. Close your eyes so I don't give away too much, so you won't want to come back tomorrow. I'll tell you when to open. I'll tell you when to open. Here. So this is one of them. We will talk a little bit about this tomorrow as well. Let's see if I can get this back up. Here we go. Actually, you know what? Let me actually just keep going. I think we will. I was going to move this to tomorrow. I think there's time to quickly go through it today. So let's keep moving. U.S.-Kenya bilateral free trade agreement talks are ongoing. That could serve as a model for U.S. bilateral engagement on the continent. Really big deal. The U.S. aspires to have a relationship with Kenya that can be modeled in terms of bilateral relationships with other continents, with other countries on the continent. That's ongoing. You can see our leaders there, President Trump, President Kenyatta. The objectives seek a mutually beneficial trade agreement that can serve as a model, as I said. The Kenyan objectives include ensuring there's no disruption in Kenya's market access in the U.S. after GOA expires in 2025, securing predictable trade, enhancing and diversifying exports and goods and services. And you can read those other points. One of the things, I've been on the calls, there have been calls sponsored by the Corporate Council on Africa and KEPSA and others. One of the things that has come through is in no uncertain terms, and I think this is good to hold up for those of you who are thinking about export, is that the expectation here is that has to be balanced out, meaning on this call that I was on, stated in no uncertain terms that the businesses here do not want Kenya to become a dumping ground just for U.S. products. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, that two-way trade and investment. I know export agency focuses on exports, but that is something I think all of us in terms of the larger stakeholder community has to keep in mind in terms of that balance. Some of the challenges are the delays in negotiation due to COVID-19, and nearly 30 non-governmental organizations have signed a letter arguing that the bilateral free trade agreement would undermine certain regional efforts and hurt certain sectors. So these are some of the things that are still being ironed out. There are at least bi-weekly calls about this. If you want more information, the embassy in the US, the Kenyan embassy, is one of the leaders in terms of, I think, information sharing in the US and Washington, DC. And you can, there's a gentleman who I think has been hired by them as a consultant who can give you firsthand up-to-date information. Please email me for that. But this is a great opportunity for US companies to engage. And you'll be finding out more about how to do that over the next couple of days from a legal perspective, partnering, trade, and logistics. So please join us for the next couple of days. I want to quickly go through this one and talk about textile and apparel value chain, how it's shifting as a result of convergence factors that are based upon policies. After each section, when we talk at the end of each section, we give you some thoughts about policies or principles about investment and trade. We want to make sure that we have at least one opportunity to kind of pull it all together, see how these factors work together. This is the one I want to mention for policy. For the next 2 days will be case studies, trade investment case studies. Here, this is a piece that I co-authored with two colleagues from China for the Johns Hopkins SICE program, China Africa Research Initiative in Washington, DC. And it talks about what's happening on the ground here in terms of the shift from China due to its excess capacity, lower labor costs, duty-free incentives for exports to the US under AGOA and its related third country fabric provision, which means you can import fabric from anywhere and make clothes. A lot of those reasons, we see some of this shift happening whereby China's coming here, and with East Africans, you know, moving the value chain along. Lot more needs to be done for East Africa. I really advocate for this integration of the value chain, which would transform East Africa. And 70% of the content produced in the region, East Africa, is exported. And so that's really, really, really important to understand that that is something that, you know, is a factor, but it has to be balanced out. Researchers agree that over-relying on foreign input of supply, meaning imports of fibers of the textile and then and making it into apparel and then exporting it out of Africa, even though, as I said before, China exports into Africa or moves it within the continent, that is a challenge. And please, this is my piece, so I can send this to you directly or give it to Thomas to share with you all tomorrow after this call. Within the region, what we focus on is how Kenya and Ethiopia really has the greatest potential for regional integration of the value chain in terms of, what do I mean? Agriculture, growing cotton, having the equipment, the expertise to convert that agricultural product into textile, silk and yarns, and then silk and everything else, and then into apparel. The talent is here. Many of you maybe think when you think about Africa apparel, I remember growing up and had a dashiki, passe. It's so much more sophisticated than that. Glamorous clothing for women, whether it's casual, really, really upscale, shoes, jewelry, you know, it is phenomenal, the talent that's underserved. And we, VentureLift Africa, MBDA Export, we're trying to, and other partners are looking to kind of improve upon that situation with Africa partners leading the way. Policy recommendations that will make more sense after you read the policy brief, but in abstract, governments should increase incentives for local production. We have some recommendations for that. U.S. government, there's an energy problem. Part of the problem with productivity is lack of sustainable and reliable energy. Solar is not as durable as instruments of gas. And so there has to be sort of a reckoning as to how do we improve upon that. And there needs to be greater collaboration between China and Africa and other governments that are involved in the sector in improving ESG, environmental, social, and governance standards for the sector, fair labor laws, environmentally free, safe and friendly production, etc. Okay, so I have thought that this section is going to be for tomorrow. It's for today, but this is the meat of the presentation actually. So I'm going to fast forward through this, but before I do, so I'm going to ask for questions now, then at the very end, maybe for the last 5 minutes, since there haven't been many questions, this may spark some. So Thomas, can I check in with you for questions as I hydrate just a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Right now, we still don't have any questions out there. So please, if anyone has any questions or comments, please submit them.
Okay, great. Let me just check one thing. Can you see the screen okay? Can you guys still see the screen okay?
I see it fine, yeah.
Okay.
It's the full screen.
Okay, great. So we're going to now give you some information on how investors view the continent, because again, I said it's important to follow the money, to understand what sectors are hot, what are not, and why, how people are getting the money in and out of the continent. That's important for both whether you're doing trade or investment. This all sets the table for the next 2 days when we will go into a deep dive on trade and a deeper dive and even a deeper dive on investment trends as well. Okay, so I am a private equity investor, know this space pretty well. I've been a venture capital investor, so I want to talk about that. These slides are pretty straightforward. Private equity investors view Africa as an increasingly attractive investment destination. You can tell by the growth, especially since 2017 and 2014, some peaks in terms of funds, in terms of the capital they've been able to mobilize to invest into Africa. And then on the right-hand side, the number and value of African private equity deals by year. Great. Consumer-facing sectors, so we call it, as an acronym for that, part of that, fast-moving consumer goods, right? So the things that you all may go to Target for or Walmart, those are fast-moving consumer goods, even clothing as well. Those are hot sectors here by the number of private equity deals. You can see consumer discretionary, consumer staples, follow the money. These are some of the, across the continent are some of the hot sectors. And in terms of the number of exits, again, how you get your money out is as important, actually more important than even putting your money in. So to follow the trends, this is a report that you can get online, Africa Venture Capital Alliance 2019 Africa PE Data Tracker. You can download it today. Study it, get to know how people are making money here and trying to avoid losing it, the sectors, the partners, and then as important as I said before, the exits. You can see that in terms of the type of exit, it's what we call a trade sale, where there's another company that's buying. The financial buyers have a presence. There aren't as many IPOs. That has to do with the level of development of the capital markets, as well as other factors, but it's an open opportunity. And there are companies, especially tech companies, that are going out of Africa to list on the London Stock Exchange. Our private equity fund, the fund that I'm aligned with, the secondary role that I have over and above VentureLift Africa, has listed a private equity fund that invests in healthcare on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. I'm sorry, yeah, Johannesburg Stock Exchange, as well as the Rwanda Security Exchange. So we're very excited about that. So these things are happening.
Dr. Allen, we got a couple of questions. Which opportunities do you foresee for a business consulting company?
So that would be in services, right? And so I think there are some opportunities in services. If you're coming here for that, then it has to be value add, meaning there's a lot of talent. Please don't have the misconception that, you know, that there aren't viable service companies here. There are. Is there a need for others? Yes. Is there an opportunity for them? Yes. My suggestion would be to have a local partner here that knows local markets well, so that you can kind of have this bridge relationship. This is our goal. This is what we're implementing. If you want to learn more, we're building a consortium of advisory firms to go after the opportunities for especially the diaspora, to be a bridge for helping companies here with export, import. And we think that's a winning way to strengthen MBEs in America as well as here. But it's not just coming over and setting up sort of a journalist tent. It's having value-added expertise to bring that's even niche, that will help in a certain way. For example, I mentioned a company I sit on the board of called Melvin's Tea. One of the things that companies like that are expanding and growing in this market, want to enter other markets, is a good partner for international distribution and marketing. And that is something that is probably the angst of a lot of businesses that want to engage the U.S. that don't know how to enter. And then when they come here, don't really know how to maybe engage U.S. companies in their business to help bring them along into the African continent. So please, whoever that inquirer is, contact me. I'd love to talk to you more about that. Thomas, is there another one?
Yes. Can you speak to payment services, cross-border payments, remittance? We are building a solution for East Africa, azonpay.com.
Yeah, so I will speak to it briefly here, but you'll see in the slide, that's one of the big investment sectors for venture capital. Let me come to that just so that I can keep moving because I have a lot of ground to cover in a little time, but I promise I'll come back to that one, Thomas. If you see me, Thomas, go past the VC slide.
Stop
shout.
you in your tracks. Okay.
Okay,
All right.
great. So in terms of the private equity allocations, you can see that West Africa is one of the leaders in terms of allocation by volume and deal size. Volume means the number of deals, deal size means the transaction value. And East Africa, though, is a viable place and destination as well. From 2014 to 2019, 184, 2.4 billion value. Median size deal is 6 million. This is for private equity. Obviously, in the US, it would be a lot larger. So that should give you a sense of the scale of the businesses here. There's even opportunity below that, what's called the missing middle, that 250,000 and 3 million area segment, even below that angel investment. We'll find out, you'll hear more about that over the next couple of days, so please stay tuned. These are really, really good opportunities to be aware of because most companies, family-owned businesses, for example, are re-examining how they grow now and their sustainability are open to taking investment because of COVID. We'll talk more about that. VC, all right, Thomas, I just remembered it, so you don't have to remind me, I'm here.
Okay.
So the number of VC deals in Africa by year, you can see are growing. The value is growing, 1.4 billion compared to 139 deals in 2019. Let me see if I'm gonna get this slide. Okay, I got it, it's this slide. The share of the number and value of VC deals in Africa, you can see again, East Africa and the financial sector, my friend who asked that question, is really hot. And I can tell you information technology, I can tell you fintech, there are a lot of players. Most of the venture capital money, I don't have that slide in here, maybe I can show it to you. WeTracker, WEE tracker.com, check it out. We'll show you that companies like Tala, like Branch, like Cellulent, and others are raising tens of millions of dollars in M-Pesa out and outperform asset because they are improving access to finance. Most of the people on the continent don't have a bank account. They don't have credit cards. They don't have Discover, Visa, MasterCard. And before these interventions, a lot of people had money at home, under mattress, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is an opportunity, but I would tell you it's becoming more crowded. But if you do come, my advice is what we don't see, we see a lot of companies, but we don't see I think this is not the view of the the MBDA Export Center. It's my view. We need to come with better ethics. The rates that are charged in some cases are usurious. Those in the US know what payday lending is. Yes, up to 200,000, 200% per year. The region that we're in, sub-Saharan Africa, the poorest region of the world. I understand making money, but we have to balance that with ethics. And so that is my editorial opinion. It's off now. I'll continue the presentation, but I encourage you, my friend, as you think about Africa, coming under market in terms of those usurious rates and try and find more of a way to help people with a product that you can make more money in the volume because you're coming at a cheaper price for credit, something to think about. But these other sectors, again, in VC, you can see how it plays out. We see healthcare at 7%. We're trying to work on that. So if there are any limited partners looking for a local-owned firm, it's an African team, we welcome your call. RH Buffalo, we are continuing to raise our fund to invest in hospitals, infrastructure, med tech, schools, equipment. That's the end of that commercial, but I want to get that in. Let's keep moving. So now we're going to go through the countries and take a look at the 5 of them and give you some information to think about. I have to go through this quickly because we only have 15 minutes, but let's go. So the current situation in Kenya, what I want to highlight on the slide, the Big 4 agenda. So when you are thinking about coming into countries, Always pay attention to what the strategic national goals are. Where is the government positioning itself? Because what typically follows are incentives to attract investment in those sectors. Manufacturing, universal healthcare, affordable housing, food security. These are all priority sectors for the government of Kenya. You will learn more about them in the Diaspora Investment and Trade Deal event coming up the week of September 21st. Kenya is the leading, the economic leader in East Africa for a number of reasons. I think, access to logistics, to trade avenues through ports on the east of Africa, on the east coast of Africa, rising middle class, well-educated population, good rule of law. Those are the things that are setting up Kenya to continue to be a financial hub and a center for a lot of multinationals. Rwanda is gaining, Uganda is gaining. Ethiopia has over 100 million people. Tanzania has a larger population. Pro-business legislation, you can see the risk there. Poverty levels are going to be constant throughout all the countries. It's just a matter of where we are in the world, and the need for greater diversification, public debt, we mentioned that. So these are some of the things to think about. You should know these organizations can invest. KEPSA, Kenya Association of Manufacturers. It has come up, it will come up. If it hasn't come to your mind, think about partners. These are partners in Kenya that you want to know. We can introduce you to them, curate a relationship into sectors. You will hear from their sister organization, the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce. All three of them, at least the second two, and maybe the first, will be part of the Diaspora Investment and Trade Deal event where you will hear from their CEO. So come back the week of September 21st. Manufacturing, private sector alliance, investment authorities, they are not the same as chambers of commerce, but I think that's an analog to what we know about in the US. There's also a US Chamber of Commerce here as well, and throughout most countries in Africa. Let's get into how you start a business. I'm not going to go through this line by line. You can receive this presentation, but again, we want to get into the meat of this. I'm doing this right now with another company that we brought in. At least one shareholder who is a citizen or legal resident. Legal resident means you have to have a work permit. And typically there are two ways to do that. As an employee, which is harder to do because you have to justify why a Kenyan cannot do the same thing. I think that's an excellent law because we can't crowd out local talent. Or you can come in as an investor, which means you have to have evidence that you can pay or have at your disposal at least $100,000. Those are the other requirements. Uganda, you can see where it is, close proximity to Kenya. Everything's in a cluster within an hour-and-a-half plane ride, so that's very, very convenient. Countries are mostly Anglophone for sure, although French is spoken in places like Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda. You can see that it has prioritized agriculture, tourism, minerals, oil and gas. There's a national development plan. It is, I think, has and we'll hear about this, we'll hear directly from the Uganda Investment Authority on some of the new provisions they have to attract trade and investment, but we want to give a high-level view of this. Exports of coffee, tea, precious metals, oil, cereals, fish. Does a lot of business with Kenya and Germany. And you can see the advantages there and some of the risk. Uganda Investment Agency will have them with us here tomorrow, or rather Thursday, for the investment growth in Uganda. Private Sector Foundation of Uganda are all partners that you want to know. Uganda Development Corporation Export Promotion Board as well. And at the bottom, there are the URLs that are noted. Starting a business, I'm not going to go through these line by line, but when you have a presentation, you can go through them line by line and see what those procedures are. And again, we can curate you directly to the personnel at each for the UIA that can help you with all of these things. Tanzania, huge potential, and I think it's important to know that there are There's lots of energy and interest in Tanzania. There's greater cooperation being sought in terms of the regulatory regime to attract investment in governance and improving governance. One of the things is, I think this is where a country, I think, can benefit from labor mobility to some extent. Not that you want to crowd the local population, but if policy is structured correctly to be able to uplift and train and build capacity, because relative to places like Kenya and Uganda, the productivity and the skill level is a little bit lower there. But I'm not going to go through this in the interest of time, line by line, but you can see what we have there in terms of the goals, the top exports, the main sectors, main investment partners. Thomas, I'm going through these quickly. Are people?
Yeah, well, you got a few questions, and then I just they want to make sure that is it possible to get a copy of your presentation? And I think after the 3 day, after the 3 days, then it'll be available. But yeah, a few of the questions. Let's see here. Can you speak a little on energy and microgrid development opportunities?
Those are plentiful under Power Africa. There are lots of companies now taking that up in places like Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, throughout the entire region, right? There are financing facilities for that. The most important thing is to get the business model right. You got to be able to come to the market cheaper. The cost of energy has to be cheaper than what's in the market, and the off-grid solution has to be accessible, reliable, and competitive. Some of the best companies that are staking a claim, if you will, and having traction have found a way to connect energy access to selling other products, appliances like TVs, radios, cooking instruments, et cetera, et cetera. So those are real opportunities. And I think that, you know, I'm happy to talk more offline about those, to point you to some companies that you might want to look at and some financing mechanisms. Here are so Thomas, just so that I can get to this, can you hold those questions until like the last few minutes? Yeah,
not a problem.
Okay, here are some of the investment-related organizations, procedures for starting a business. Rwanda, you can see, I really like Rwanda, smaller country, 12 million, but President Kagame has really focused well on building a service economy, aspiring to be the Singapore of Africa, building a technology clusters. There is a Kigali Innovation City and other things that are happening there. They again will be at the Diaspora Investment and Trade Deal event. You don't want to miss it, the week of September 21st. And their vision is an ambitious plan, as you can see. And so there is a tremendous opportunity to engage Rwanda. The first thing you notice is, wow, the roads are so good. The infrastructure is so good in Kigali. And so that is true. They've done a good job. It's a younger population because of the genocide. You'll see a lot of young people under 35 or under 40 in leadership positions, but very, very talented. I have a number of friends, and you're about to be pointed to where you should go. Rwanda Development Board at this institution, they're doing a great job. Starting a business, we have those. Ethiopia, another one of my favorite countries on the continent, 110 million almost, underserved, opening up. There are some careful considerations around the capital controls in terms of getting money out, repatriating that money after it's been invested. Those are some of the biggest concerns from some investors, but the government now is beginning to to address those things. We're seeing more international stakeholders come into Ethiopia, huge agricultural opportunity. You can see it there. Coffees, vegetables, oilseeds, and gold are being exported. We can help you curate it with curated relationships there. And then I want to get to this phenomenon of family-owned businesses, which is really, really a stark difference from in the US. Yes, you have large families like the Waltons owning Walmart and others, but a lot of companies in the US trade, right, on NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, et cetera. Family-owned businesses are closely held. And some of them, do eventually go on to be publicly traded, but most do not. And I can say this: they have strong advantage of understanding local culture, and many don't take on institutional capital. They want to be closely held to maintain control. But I will say this: I have been on a number of seminars which I've led. We co-created with one institution a women's and manufacturing program. I've been teaching a webinar on business sustainability for ABSA Bank here, and a lot of those attendees, some of them represented family-owned companies. And I can tell you're thinking about options now because economically more of these businesses are constrained. And I actually think merger and acquisition activity is going to be stronger here over the next five years as a result of this, but also as a result of necessary consolidation. Most of those are in Kenya. You can see good number are in manufacturing. This is when you see I think the prevalence of Indian entrepreneurs, especially in places like Kenya. There's an entrepreneurial class I don't think many people in America know about that is driving much of the industrial manufacturing sector here, and is part of, I think, understanding how to do business, is the diversity of stakeholders, their interests, how to work with them, and some of these cultural dynamics that are important. I got 5 minutes.
Yeah, you got 5 minutes, Dr. Allen.
Okay. All right. I'm going to touch on this. This is the East Africa Trade Investment Hub deal that I worked on personally, so I know it very well. The way it's set up is Family Milk. I believe it's not called Family Milk because it is a family-owned business, but it is a family-owned business. That's just the name. Was looking for private equity investment. So this goes against the grain of what I was saying before. This is a company that wanted to take on investment, right? And you know why? Because they saw a huge opportunity. That was for hygienically, locally produced milk for the middle class. And one thing that in the dairy industry that's important, there's something called lifelong milk, and there's fresh milk. There's a special technology. So if you go into what would be, you guys may know, like a, I don't know, a CVS. Here, if there was a CVS, you would see is milk that stays on the shelf, not refrigerated, on the shelf for a period of time. You would think, wow, that's interesting, because it's a special technology that this company acquired or developed through this investment that helped them move into this this lifelong milk segment, whereby they could take on a new segment of the market with having fresh milk, with not having fresh milk, which would spoil after a couple of days. And because of logistics and other things, it was important to have another option. And so this company, that was one of the attractive aspects of this company for this investor, Shoals. And the shareholding was 40%, the revenue growth, they saw the market share, you can see all of the results. Leading dairy processor in Ethiopia. We've advised them on behalf of the East Africa Trade Investment Hub, close this deal. Some of the key takeaways: private equity investors can bring much needed management assistance and power for negotiation. And this deal had a tremendous social impact. This extension of the life of being able to shelf milk for periods of time so that it doesn't spoil. I did it, Thomas. I think I have at least 2 minutes left to take on questions. I've already talked about this event. You can come back tomorrow and learn more. And yeah.
Okay. So are there any East African regionalization initiatives that we should be aware of or take note of?
Yes. So each of the regions of in East Africa, it's an East Africa community. That is a region, right? It actually doesn't include Ethiopia technically. In Southern Africa, there's SADC, there's ECOWAS in West Africa. And the thing that you should know is the Inter-Africa Continental Free Trade area is gonna supersede all of that. Those will not go away, supersede in terms of the priority and the emphasis now to make that work in complement to these existing regional clusters. So I would say learn as much as you can about EAC, of course, but also the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement.
And then there's one more. I understand that there are challenges to getting legitimate pharmaceuticals into Africa. My company is licensed to export pharmaceuticals. Please advise the best method to establish relationships in this sector.
Okay, so I think you have to, when you come into a country, I would go through one of these trade associations. So let me just take Kenya. I would go, if it's a manufacturing, I would go to CAM, import, export, look at KEPSA, but you have to establish also here good government relations to help you navigate, to understand the regulatory policy, because there'll be certain rules and regulations that you will have to meet. So the Ministry of Health, in other words, should become your friend. And then I would get to know some of the private sector actors, particularly Catalyst Fund and other investors that invest in healthcare, our fund. And there are efforts by a number of other sort of NGOs to, or I should say donors that actually fund the import of certain drugs, and the government is an off-taker of that. And so I think understanding the value chain, the supply chain, and here's the thing, ways to reduce the price, because that's the thing that I think is the big conundrum in the pharmaceutical industry. Even generic drugs are high in some cases. And the disease burden here is such that we have to get cheaper solutions out to more people.
Okay, and it's 11 o'clock.
All right. Well, we definitely like to thank everyone for joining us. We'd like to thank Dr. Allen. You know, you can go ahead and take a breath now, Dr. Allen. That was a lot of very useful and very helpful information. We look forward to tomorrow. Again, we'll talk more and dig deeper into the money aspect, and as well as stakeholders on the ground in the United States, as well as on the ground in Kenya, talk further in regard to deal making. And so you guys can really get ready to get on the ground and really make some money in Africa, because there's a ton of opportunity. Trust me, I've been going to the continent since 2000. I have an office in Senegal, I have an office in Ghana, and the opportunities are endless. So again, on behalf of MBDA Export Center, our director, Ms. Pat Haynes, myself, Mr. Terry Tatum, Thomas Phelps, Rob as well, handling the technical support on the back end, which you guys can't see, but he did a phenomenal job. And as well as Mr. Vincent Williams, the new president of the Minority Supplier Development Council in Chicago. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Terry, are you still there? Oh. Just want to check the chat.
Yeah, it looks like Terry left. There was a couple other, there was one last question I didn't get to. What programs are there to help American citizens get access to investment capital? And will you be allowing to share your presentation with the participants, Dr. Allen, or?
I'm sorry?
Will people have
so
access to your presentation?
Sure, we'll do that after the third day,
right.
because
Okay.
we may want to fine tune some things in response to questions and feedback, but that is the plan. This is being recorded. It's my understanding this will be made available as well.
Yes. Yes, I'll send the link out to the people that were on the call. Let me stop recording. What happened to, where's the stop recording button at? Stop recording.
So yes, you go down to more.